This is our year. Grab a Legend in Tears t-shirt over at my shop at 4th Wall today to celebrate the year in which the legend is reforged. Tears of the Kingdom is finally upon us this year. Rise up, Zelda fans, it is truly our year. But with the game incoming rapidly, we know very little about it, the sequel to Breath of the Wild. So in that light, here are my top 10 hopes for this game. And I've got grand hopes for this, the game I feel should seek to be everything that Breath of the Wild was and so much more. So let's get that hype going. This is HMK. Don't forget to subscribe for more Zelda content and check out my Patreon as we're going full force into Tears of the Kingdom. Let's dive directly into the noise. Breath of the Wild's world was phenomenal. There are no two ways about it. It paved the way for the new generation of application when it comes to building a seamless open world. But after years of learning and experimenting with all of its secrets, Tears of the Kingdom needs to make good on its promise with the new, beyond that of Breath of the Wild. While we had a glimpse of the explorer areas in the sky above and within the clouds, and a hint of also exploring the underground as well as the mysterious beyond, I just hope that these areas will be equally expansive as the original world of Hyrule, if not close to it. I'm sure they could pull it off, and going off of playing Elden Ring, that game was amazing, when exploring the sheer expansive underground areas of the Eternal Cities. It gets me hyped for the idea of Zelda tackling something like this with their own gameplay aspects. Not gonna lie, I really had no problem with weapon breaking in Breath of the Wild. As Aonuma said, the continued adventure and constantly finding new weaponry was part of the fun. But there is that one weapon that comes along every now and again that you wished had a little bit more life to it. And a feature that I find oddly missing from Breath of the Wild was weapon regeneration, where you could take a weapon that is about to break and revitalize its strength. But why stop there? Where were all of the blacksmiths in Breath of the Wild? In Tears of the Kingdom, let's get exclusive craftable weapons that you can only make, not find, and better yet, upgrade established weaponry to new heights not seen in Breath of the Wild, with the ability of weapon paths. Take that flame blade, for example. It can either become a molten flame blade or a holy flame blade. Robust synthesis would take the longevity of a game like Tears of the Kingdom to massively new heights. Now, this is something personal and a bit greedy, but I don't care, this is my list. I know this game is going to be the direct sequel to Breath of the Wild, but with years after that game, Tears of the Kingdom's animations are going to have to be above and beyond, especially in terms of combat. I want to see Link get wild with his attack strings. I'm not talking about stuff like Age of Calamity, but more like adapting what we've seen in Wind Waker, Twilight Princess, or even his Flurry Rush animation becoming his regular new combo. Link's previous movements when he swung his sword was pretty bland, but I get it, he lost his memories, but now they're back. And going off of that, on a side note, the graphical capabilities of Breath of the Wild was impressive, especially for a Wii U game, but now with Tears of the Kingdom being built from the ground up on Nintendo Switch and what we've seen in Age of Calamity, I'm ready for Nintendo to push this system even more with Tears of the Kingdom, in terms of cool effects and animations. The biggest known open secret at this point with Tears of the Kingdom is the integration of the Zonai, the mysterious tribe that suddenly dropped from the face of Hyrule that is spoken about in whispers in Breath of the Wild. While many continue to deny their existence and supposed importance in Tears of the Kingdom, I feel a grand exposition on the Zonai and their history is something that is needed within the game or surrounding its promotion. I mean, Nintendo really decided to go in on the subject within creating a champion, and with the symbolism of the architecture in the actual logo of Tears of the Kingdom, is definitely not out of the realm of possibility for them to reveal a lot about this tribe. I just hope they don't dance around it like they do with other games. I've said this time and time again, please, for the love of all that is sacred, more enemy variety. But many would ask, where would they have been if not in Breath of the Wild? Well, if we're dealing with the underground and the sky above, I've always had the idea that new enemy types and classes could be introduced to the world of Hyrule through these avenues, where the underground could bring more dark monstrosities like likes, Poes, Redeads, Skulltulas, Darknuts. You get the idea, dead hands. While the sky could bring more classy foes with more sophisticated technology than what we've seen with Sheikah creations like Guardians, and maybe sacred rivals that appear to test Link rather than outright clash with him, like Godon from The Wind Waker. And you know, I'm still banking on the idea that Nintendo could reuse these designs. Despite some commentary's position on it, I am firmly within the camp that felt that the story in Breath of the Wild was great, and that it was the presentation that was massively lacking. But this was due to how the game's progression was structured to allow the true enough freedom in crafting your own adventure. While it was strong in some parts, it worked less than stellar in others. In that sense, it is time to bring back a core focus on the story that needs to be built upon what went down in Breath of the Wild, or even further beyond that. Like, I'm getting mad Skyward Sword vibes, etc, etc. I'm not saying ditch the freedom to tackle the game in your way anyway, but at least establish a bit of linearity when it comes to presenting the game's story and give us a questline system rather than a memory system, which I'm sure we're not gonna have for the main story, but it would be nice to retain that to supplement the story, in having us discover Ganondorf's memories in order to get his side of the past to complete the whole tale presented in Tears of the Kingdom. I promise you, this is a different Hope than the animation Hope. The combat in Breath of the Wild was pretty solid and standard for the most part when it comes to Zelda games, but with the respectable AI enemies and bosses that could be in Tears of the Kingdom, I want a robust evolution to the combat overall. Nothing too insane, but adaptations of how combat was expanded upon in previous games, such as The Wind Waker and Twilight Princess with the hidden skills, possibly even having new attack strings when it comes to timed button pressing and cancelling. That's for the overall scope of how combat could be inputted, but other facets that I would love to have is something like dual-wielding weaponry. It's kind of hinted at with the dual gauntlet protections, and different and new weaponry and skills. And something that I don't see a lot of people talking about is horseback or mounted combat. Yeah, we need an overhaul to that. Go back to how it was in Twilight Princess, because how it was in Breath of the Wild, that really ain't it. Honestly, I want new enemies and foes to give me a problem, like with early level Guardians and Lionels in Breath of the Wild. Yeah, I want that, but more frequent. And don't get me started on the ideas I have for how the new Master Sword can be forged and play out. Blade extension, element infusion, energy manipulation, come on Nintendo. Alright, I'm done playing games at this point. While I believe in a specific timeline placement for Breath of the Wild and yes, Tears of the Kingdom child timeline, I would like Nintendo to actually give us a timeline confirmation for these games in Tears of the Kingdom. And before a bunch of y'all run to the comments, no, the timeline has not been confirmed yet. No, the timelines didn't converge to create the timeline where Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom are. And no, Breath of the Wild does not take place at the end of all three combined or otherwise. The image that got spread to hell and back suggesting this point was taken incredibly out of context, in which it confirms that Breath of the Wild takes place after every known game of any timeline, but without designation, but outside of that lined point. You know, due to the lack of a line, which goes in line with what Aonuma said about the timeline placement years ago. Furthermore, Aonuma did confirm in creating a champion that Breath of the Wild, and by extension Tears of the Kingdom, does take place at the end of one of the timelines, but chose not to disclose it for the time being for the sake of conversation and theories, which Nintendo enjoys, and it makes a ton of sense because conversation creates sales. But now it is time. Tears of the Kingdom needs to reveal that sweet timeline placement. Now, one of the biggest things that Zelda fans have been asking for in Tears of the Kingdom is the return of traditional dungeons, but obviously in the style and application of Breath of the Wild. And that's me. I'm Zelda fans. But being honest, I had no problem with how the Divine Beasts acted as main dungeons in Breath of the Wild. It was on par with how the game was being presented in challenging the conventions of Zelda, as well as all of the Sheikah shrines scattered throughout Hyrule. Now listen, I do not want to give that up for traditional dungeons. I want Sheikah shrines to return in Tears of the Kingdom, not in terms of a one-to-one readaptation, but the overall mechanic, if it's replaced with Zonai altars or something like that, as long as it's still there. And I want traditional dungeons as well. I want them on top of everything else that was present in Breath of the Wild, possibly even including Divine Beasts. Round 2, baby! Listen, this is the sequel to Breath of the Wild. The game needs to be bigger, better, and wilder. I feel Tears of the Kingdom can truly break down the door on how much content we could stuff into a Zelda game. Breath of the Wild was just the beginning. So to have traditional dungeons be on top of everything and act as the main launchpad to push the main story along, plus all the other avenues explored in the original, would truly make this something along the lines of the best and biggest Zelda game. Something to dethrone Breath of the Wild. Now, this is my biggest hope for Tears of the Kingdom, something that I find incredibly erratic when it comes to Zelda games in terms of each game's release one after the other. Before I get started, everyone has preferences, 100%, when it comes to Zelda games, and there is no bad Zelda game. Especially considering Zelda games get different directions with most of their games, but other games are way more direct in line with their predecessor, more so than others. What I'm trying to drive at is that I want Tears of the Kingdom as the sequel to Breath of the Wild to make Breath of the Wild look like an afterthought, a beta, a mere stepping stone to greatness rather than simply being a derivative plus to the previous game. Not to trample on its legacy, but for Tears of the Kingdom to be a clear-cut improvement on all things before it. It is definitely different from going to a game like Twilight Princess from the Wind Waker and then going off into something like Skyward Sword. And I feel that sometimes Zelda, or games in general, stumble, and I mean stumble, when trying to accomplish that. Tears of the Kingdom has the burden of being the sequel to Breath of the Wild rather than simply being the next Zelda. So it has more to accomplish with its release and anticipation, and that is my biggest hope and biggest fear for this game. But after seeing what Nintendo has accomplished with Breath of the Wild, I've got confidence. I truly hope and believe that this game can and will be the greatest Zelda game ever, if not one of the greatest games ever. And in this day and age, more and more competition are stacked against the series that innovated them. While the confidence of many varies, I'm sure we are due for an incredible surprise with this Tears of the Kingdom, and it is just a matter of time. Until then, be sure to like, share, and most importantly subscribe to HMK for more Zelda content going into the release of this amazing game. Be sure to leave a comment on what is your greatest hope for Tears of the Kingdom, and big thanks to my Patreon supporters for helping making this video happen. Be sure to check out my Patreon and to grab a Legend in Tears t-shirt over at my shop at Fourth Wall. This is our year. Until the next video, this has been your boy HMK, and I'll check you guys later.